Good evening. I am Omiyẹmi Artisia Green, Professor of Theater and Africana Studies and Provost Faculty Fellow at William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. I'm also the Vice President for Professional Development with ATHE, and welcome to another installation of Transitions in Leadership. I am here this evening with Dr. Khalid Long, who is an associate professor of theater arts and coordinator of the foundations area, and also interim associate dean for research and creative endeavors at Howard University. Dr. Long is a scholar, dramaturg, and director who specializes in African American, Black diasporic theater, performance, and literature through the lenses of Black feminist, womanist thought, queer studies, and performance studies. Accordingly, his work addresses the intersections of race, class, gender, and sexuality within marginalized and oppressed communities. Dr. Long has been published in Continuum, the Journal of African Diaspora Drama, Theater and Performance, the Black Theater Review, Theater, the Journal of American Drama and Theater, Modern Drama, Journal of Dramatic Theater Theory and Criticism, Theater Topics, Theater Journal, the Cambridge Companion to African American Theater, essays on psychogeography and the city as performance, and the Routledge Companion to African American Theater and Performance. Dr. Long is a regular contributor to Black Masks and has a forthcoming chapter in the edited collection, Dramaturgy and History, Staging the Archive. In addition to all of the scholarship and new knowledge that Dr. Long is publishing for the field to keep this thing going for us, Dr. Long is the Vice President and Conference Planner for the August Wilson Society and serves on the American Society for Theater Research Board. Dr. Long recently served as the VP and Conference Planner for the Black Theater Association with ATHE, and was also the Vice President for Advocacy for ATHE. And the credits continue, but I'm going to stop here so that we can really get into this conversation. Please welcome Dr. Long this evening.
Yes, thank you for having me, Professor Green. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I have a couple of questions that, I want to offer for our listeners around your ascension into leadership throughout the academy, in addition to the profession, the field itself. And so for our first question, tell us what you do as the interim associate dean for research and creative endeavors at Howard University. And as a part of this question, if you could talk a little bit about your decision to take on a more senior leadership role. How did you know that you were ready? Were there steps that you took to prepare for this particular role? If this question isn't long enough for you, might you also talk about some of the valuable experiences that you have had that have prepared you to do the work that you currently do?
Yes, thank you for those questions.
You're welcome.
So where to start? So I've always wanted to go into a leadership role within the academy. There's always been sort of my goal. There's always been the trajectory that I, at the very least, thought I had planned for myself. And I've always been clear about that. I should note that prior to joining Howard University as a faculty member, I was at University of Georgia, and prior to that, I was at Columbia College, Chicago. While at Columbia College Chicago, we called it CCC. While I was there, I was the coordinator for the theater studies area. And in addition to that, I developed the theater studies concentration. And so in terms of, my, official faculty capacity, I began in Columbia, and the leadership responsibilities sort of developed there. But even when I was in graduate school, I knew that I wanted to go into academia, and I always said, I want to go into higher education, and I want to be in upper administration. And so at Columbia is where it started, and I began to sort of just listen and to learn and watch those that I admired, in not just at Columbia, but in the profession. And so even at ATHE, and ASTR, MLA, ASALA, and various organizations that I was a part of, I would listen to the presidents and the vice presidents and the conference planners of how to be a leader, and various approaches that they would take and so forth. And then fast forward, I'm now here at Howard University. I will say though that during my interview at Howard, I interviewed for a position as a faculty member, and also someone who could participate in the development of the curriculum. And so I am a specialist in curriculum development. And so, thinking about the programs and things I've done at Columbia as well as UGA, and sort of, bringing those skills with me to Howard. Um, there were conversations during the interview process about upper administration. I said if I take this position, it'll be my third institution. And I, can see myself in the DMV area for a while, and I can see myself at Howard University for a while. And so with that, I want to talk about upper administration. Are there possibilities of moving up? And they said, yes, there is. And they said, we're glad that you shared that with us, because we could begin to have those conversations rather than waiting or guessing or
Yes.
assuming or not even considering you because you didn't mention it. And so I was approached by our former dean, Felicia Rashad, as well as the assistant dean, for faculty services, Denise Saunders Thompson. We had a meeting actually in the fall 2023, and we began initiating conversations about this position. Excuse me, not about this position. I'm sorry, not about this position, about leadership roles, and,
Yes.
and stepping up, I should say, not this position. Um, and so there were other opportunities that they were, thinking about for me. And so they said, well, we want to do a series of interviews, a series of conversations, what Dean Rashad called them. But, they were interviews. And
Mhm.
so really was about, not only where do I see myself, but where do I see the university going? Where do I
Right.
see Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts going? What's missing? What are the holes? What are my, not critiques, but what are my observations? And they welcomed me to be completely honest, fully transparent, or as I like to call it, critically honest. And sort
Yes.
of went from there. And then there was an opportunity to step into this role as interim associate dean of research and creative endeavors. And they said, we're considering you for this position. Would you like to step in? And I said, yes. And so there were more conversations and more meetings around this particular position. So going back to your first question about how do I see what are my responsibilities in this role?
Mhm.
My job is to elevate, and widen the research agenda, for faculty members within the Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts.
Right.
My job is to develop programming that is outward facing. My
Mhm.
job is to inspire and influence faculty members to embark on research projects, and to
Mhm.
also make the connections between the College of Fine Arts. Well, I'm the liaison between the College of Fine Arts and the Office of Research at Howard University,
Mhm.
particularly around grants, funding, gifts, donorship, and so forth. I'm also
Yes.
the liaison to the Office of Development and Alumni Relations, where oftentimes
Yes.
gifts and donor, sponsored, donorships and gifts and so forth, they go to that particular office. And sometimes we have a donor say, we want this to be used for this particular endeavor. And as you know, you cannot just simply take a check, right? So I'm the liaison in those kinds of areas. But I want to say that, Howard, I can say this publicly, Howard University has met the metrics, to become an R1.
Yes.
I'm just going to say that. That's all that I can say. We've met the metrics. And so we have a new president, Dr. Ben Vinson III, and he is a humanities president. He is a research-oriented president. He's a scholar. He's a historian, actually. And so Dr. Vincent wants to see more publications. He wants to see more creative projects that are outward facing. And when I say
Yes,
outward facing, I'm talking about, it's one thing to do programming and initiatives on campus
that's right.
for the campus body, but it's another to do
That's
things
right.
that are for what I call the term that I'm using is public consumption.
Yes.
And so it's a term that I've been using since I stepped into this role. And so my job is really to get us inspired to take on various projects and to figure out what are the resources, what do we need,
Yes.
and so forth. So yeah, that's the role.
I love it. We're also here at William and Mary. We also fits the Carnegie Mellon definition of an
Yes.
R1. And so we are too having this same conversation. Just this past Friday, I was talking
Yes.
to the president about this conversation.
Yes.
But you know, one of the things that I appreciated about what you were saying in terms of where you saw yourself going is that you made it you announced it, right?
Yes.
You made your intentions known. You said that you listened. You observed people that you admired, and that your leadership development, like you can trace it clearly
Yes.
through your career, and all of those things are bearing out in the role that you currently have.
Yes.
And so, you know, this next question doesn't really apply because I can see where you have
Yep.
taken like an active role
Yep.
in trying to pursue leadership. But I think what I'll redirect us to talk a little bit more about mentorship, which would
Mhm.
allow you to maybe expand upon something you said earlier about the observation of those
Yes.
that you admired. And so, can you talk about whose shoes you might be standing in,
Mhm.
or footsteps you might be
Mhm.
following, or shoulders that you might be standing on
Yes. Yes.
as a senior leader now?
Yes. Thank you for that question because I think it's always important to acknowledge those who sort of laid out the pathway for you. So I went to
Mhm.
Cheney University of Pennsylvania, which is America's oldest historically Black college, HBCU. And I think it, well, let me actually, it starts before that. So I'm from Philly. I'm from Philadelphia. I grew up in a dry cleaners. My grandparents, owned a dry cleaner. So we had a family-owned business. And I grew up watching them. And I was about 8 years old working in the cleaners. And I'm not talking about, handing someone their garments. I'm talking about I was writing tickets, entering the information into QuickBooks. We were using QuickBooks at that time. I was handling the cash register. I have a twin brother. My twin brother he was pressing what we, from the big machine. He was pressing clothes. I was learning how to sew at that time. My grandfather was a major tailor, a significant tailor in Philadelphia, well known. And so we grew up in that environment. And so organizational skills were beginning to develop early on, right? Knowing that things had to be in place, knowing that you had to open at a certain time, knowing that by if just something as small as when a customer comes in and says, "Oh, can I get these back? Same day service. I'm so sorry if you're not in by 12 o'clock. We don't do same day service." So
Right.
just thinking about organization in that way and thinking about protocol and routine, if that makes sense. So really
Mhm.
it started with my grandparents actually and my father, watching them and growing up with them and listening to them on the telephone. Every Sunday, my grandfather, we would go down to what we call this industrial area in South Philly to get supplies. And so watching him develop these relationships with the suppliers. And I'm not talking about simply, here you go, thank you for the hangers. But like there was one company named Fleischmann's that we would get a lot of our supplies from. So, but watching how they interacted, watching that relationship. Oh,
Right.
this is a 30-year relationship that we've been getting supplies from this company. We know
Mhm.
each other and there's a care and concern. So that right there, something that was instilled in me early on that as a leader, as someone who owns a business, as someone who's in charge, as someone who is managing, right, the kind of care, it's like an ethics of care that you have to develop.
That's right.
So fast forward, of course, undergrad, when I went to school, watching at Cheyney University, watching my professors, in particular, I'm thinking about Felicia Simone, who was the advisor for the NAACP. I was the president of the NAACP. And it's one thing to be a part of a student organization, but I was the president of the NAACP during the time that Barack Obama was running. He was a candidate to be
Mhm.
president. We organized so to the point that Cheney, Pennsylvania, which was technically a red dot right outside of Philadelphia in the suburban rural Delaware County area, we turned those areas into blue areas because of our advocacy and because of our work under our advisor at that time. And then
Yes.
also getting Cheney University students. We had this understanding that if you live somewhere 6 to 8 months out of the year, you should vote there. So we got
Yes.
students registered on campus, and because of Stanford University being a large entity in a small rural area,
Mhm.
we then became, we had the power
That's right.
that then the surrounding communities had to come to campus to our town hall meetings and so forth and create
Okay.
partnerships and relationships. Fast forward, I went to Miami University for graduate school, and my mentor there was Dr. Paul Bryant Jackson, significant scholar, theater artist. I watched him as he was the director of graduate studies. He was
Okay.
also my advisor at that time. So watching how he would conduct meetings and how he advocated for students. What I also
Mhm.
learned was that in these kinds of roles, and I think that was the thing that got me. I said, oh, I want to be an advocate for students.
Mhm.
This is ultimately why I'm here. If I just want to be in a leadership role, I can go work for the government or work for a
That's
post
right.
office or somewhere else. Um, there was also Anne Elizabeth Armstrong, one of my professors
Yes.
there, watching her, and in particular her work around, what she would consider to be a feminist praxis,
Mhm.
right? And what does that look like even in leadership roles and administrative roles? Um, Fast forward, I went to my PhD program, and I think it was there that I really got to experience it, the full gamut of academia and leadership, being a PhD student, being a TA, you're in meetings. And so they would have TAs sometimes join. I think there was like a weekly faculty meeting that we would join if you were a TA, because you had to report out and talk about the courses that you were teaching, particularly if you were instructor on record. And so just listening and watching them. And so I'm thinking about people like Frank Hildy, even Phaedra Carpenter, who was my advisor, but
Mhm.
she was also someone who I watched in terms of her advocacy for students, Scott Reese, James Harding. And there was also a professor outside of theater. She was an American study, Psyche Williams Forson. I was
Mhm.
enamored at the ways in which she moved. She moved, in my opinion, with a sense of urgency. And I liked her style and her approach. I mean, she was really quite no nonsense, and I liked that about her. And so, yeah, so those are some of the folks that I've been watching over the years. Oh, and I forgot to mention this, of course, where a lot of my actual experience came in, and that was with the August Wilson Society.
Yes.
The August Wilson Society, um, which was founded and led by Dr. Sandra Shannon for many, many years. And under her leadership as her vice president, conference planner twice, watching how she worked. And again, Dr. Shannon had a very she had this, again, she exuded this kind of ethics of care. And so it taught me that really it was about getting down to business, but also ensuring that your folks are okay and that they're doing well and that they're getting what they needed professionally as well as personally, so that they're able to carry out, whatever their responsibilities and duties are.
You mentioned care and concern a couple of times, and I think this is a doorway for you to now maybe talk a little bit about the epistemological values that undergird your work as a leader. And you might start with this ethic of care, right? And
Yes.
like, what does that look like in actual practice?
Yes. So it's funny because I wrote an article for the Cambridge Campaign to African American Theater, edited by Harvard
Mhm.
Young. I wrote an article for the second edition on
Mhm.
staging Black Lives Matter. And so this idea of
Yes.
ethics of care was something that I was attempting to grapple with a little bit in the conclusion. And I was talking about how artists often work, particularly think about Black Lives Matter and so forth, and anti-Blackness, and state-sanctioned violence. How ethics of care can look, you know, quite different depending on the arena that you're in. Um, but for me, it is about saying, I care about you holistically, right? So I care, and that's from my students to my colleagues. You know, I care about you holistically. If you are not well, you cannot move forward. And that is as a student or as a colleague, right? If something is happening, even personally. Now, that doesn't mean I want to get all up in your business. That doesn't mean I want to intervene, but it does mean let me check in and see that you are where you need to be. Even if that simply means I want to give you the opportunity and the space to say, I can't do this. And that's okay. Always knowing that that is okay, right? I think we have been trained and socialized to think that we are not supposed to give up or resign or quit or back off. I'll give you an example. I was the vice president for BTA, the Black Theater Association, and I ended up resigning from that position. Now, folks create all kinds of narratives about why, but the reason was because I was overwhelmed at that time and my focus was not there. And I
Yeah.
didn't think that I was serving the organization, you know, to the best of my ability. And I knew that someone else could. So two things. I didn't want to show up and give half of what I know that I could give, and
Right.
also make space for somebody else to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Give someone else the opportunity to do it just as good and or better. So,
Right.
so to this point around ethics of care, it's also about the survivalship of the organization or the
That's
company
right.
or the thing. I have watched too many people concerned about their legacy or concerned about their role, and what they're gaining from it, but
Mm.
have no real um, care or concern about the actual organization or the product or the program or the students, which I would include in all of those as someone in higher education. So for me, that's sort of all that is sort of involved in this idea of ethics of care. But also advocacy. The last thing I'll say is advocacy. And what do I mean by that? I'll give you an example. We had a town hall meeting at Howard University last semester, the spring 2024 semester, around a
Right.
production that we had that we produced, Silence and Soul by Professor Michael McElroy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a musical, and there were conversations around the topic and the themes within the musical, and it dealt with young Black queer people, students
Mm-hmm.
in particular, or young queer people.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a town hall meeting because it was just like you know, HBCUs are quite conservative,
Mm-hmm.
which ironically they are historically queer, but they're also conservative. So we had a town hall meeting to really sort of open up and allow students and faculty and staff to have this conversation. And I was one of the panelists or whatever you want to call it. And I also was the dramaturg for the production. So partly that was part of my responsibility. But in that
Mm-hmm.
moment, I was serving as a faculty member. And I remember students talking about faculty members not addressing them with the appropriate pronouns
Mm-hmm.
or utilizing what we would call dead names and so forth. And
Okay.
doing it in a way that was not about, oh, I forgot or I'm learning, but in a sort of vitriolic way of saying, I don't believe in this and I want to move forward in the way in which I want. And I
So just
remember,
for clarification, dead name would be a name that the student is not using anymore. They could
correct,
be their birth name, but I have a preferred name.
correct,
Okay.
correct, correct. And so I just remember like getting heated and like the heat was rising. I felt it. And I said, and I remember like sort of busting in the conversation in a moment. And I looked directly into the students in the audience and I said, I want to make this clear. If any professor or administrator or staff member, if anyone of authority on this campus, blank, 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 you know, to wrap it all up, does not respect you or honor you and who you are and your identity, here's my cell. And I think I was like, my cell is, and I named out my cell. And
Right.
I said, you call me immediately. Because for me, it's about advocating on the student's behalf,
That's right.
particularly when folks are problematic, when they are troubling, and when they are being what I would actually consider anti-Black at an HBCU.
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, and I think something hit then. Students just started coming to my office, and now I can't get rid of them, because of that
Mm.
kind of advocacy that
Yes.
many of them had never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in the midst of your care for your own work-life balance
Hmm.
and your ability to give yourself fully to every endeavor. So give 100% of the capacity that you have to give to each endeavor,
Hmm.
in addition to your ethic of care for the health of the organization that you may be affiliated with and
Hmm.
or leading in some capacity. This clearly extends to the advocacy you have for your students. So in moments like that, like, can you talk to us about what that? It's not just I'm resigning, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I gave an example to a peer based on something that I had learned in a professional development workshop, and they said, um, if we were to look at your outlook, right, because that's our institutional platform for
Hmm.
communication, if we were to
Hmm.
look at your outlook, would we see care in
Hmm.
practice,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And without telling everybody, like, I'm literally at this loctician's place, I'm
Hmm.
literally at this nail shop, you would absolutely see
Yes.
um, my my self-care
Yes.
in operation. I block out the time such that other meetings cannot be placed
Yes.
in those times.
Yes.
And I give broad
Yep.
descriptors of what I need to remember so that
Yep.
I show up wherever I need to be.
Yep.
So that's an example of what this looks like in practice in my own life. But what
Yes.
does that look like beyond the obvious? I'm taking a step
Yeah.
back.
It's funny. I always think back to something Dr. Jackson said years ago, when I was in my master's program with him in Miami, Ohio. He said, "You got to have something to go home to." Dr. Jackson, I watched him. He was married to his partner, Jim, for about 36 years before his passing, or something in that run, 30 something years. Dr. Jackson would often go to the airport immediately after class on Fridays because their careers had separated them. After they'd been together for so long, there was a period where they were living separately because of their careers. And he would go to the airport every Friday. And I said, "You always going to the airport?" He goes, "I got to go home." What he was telling me was you have to have something to go home to,
Right.
and not obligations and responsibilities. I'm also a caretaker. I should say that. I take care of my grandmother
Yes,
with other family members. And folks who know me, as I call her, my favorite girl in the world.
that's right.
Yep.
Mhm.
Like for instance, she was here last couple of days, and then she went
Mhm.
back to Philly. Um, and I'm naming that to say that is a responsibility that I have. Even outside of her, I get joy and care from her, but outside of that, I am married. I go home to them. I am family oriented. I am married. I go home to that. And I am we like at home. I'll give an at home. We call our home our peaceful sanctuary.
Mhm.
So we are clear about who we let in our home. We are
Yes.
clear about energies that we let in our home. We are clear about, like, so for instance, if there's a rough conversation that needs to be had, even at home with folks that live in our home, we'll often
Mhm.
take a drive,
Yes.
cut music on, and we call them our check-ins.
Mhm.
We don't do them in the house, we do them on the drives because the drives are smooth. One has to
Mhm.
be focused on the road. Um, and by the time we return home, everything's great. Uh,
Mhm.
we do date nights once a week,
Mhm.
even if we don't feel like it, even if it's 30-minute walk to grab ice cream or something, just to say we've done it, we do that. Um, I have loving and wonderful relationships with friends, great friends. and I make sure that I cultivate and continue to sort of grow in those relationships. Um, and I also do things for myself. Sometimes I say, I want to go to Target and walk around. And then I'll go have lunch at Panera Bread and get soup. And then I'm gonna go have a cocktail somewhere by myself and play solitaire on my phone. Things like that. That brings me peace and joy. It's not always about the extravagant travel plans or vacations, subtle things that brings me joy for 30 minutes to an hour or a day. I also binge watch a lot of television. Believe it or not, I do watch television. I like series. I let them rack up and I go, I got 7 series to watch over this semester. So just little small things that brings me joy. But I think, to wrap all that up, it really is about what do I go home to when I say, okay, I'm done with work today, or enough is enough, or today wasn't a great day, and I want
Right.
to check out for a second. Is there something at home that brings me joy? And the answer for me is yes.
Mm-hmm.
It really is about developing the thing outside of the career. I have heard many, many people say that the career cannot be everything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have big feelings about that because I am someone who dedicated a lot of my early adulthood to the development of my career. I'm someone who went to graduate school, undergrad, master's, second master's, PhD, all the way through because I was
Mm-hmm.
focused on the career.
That's right.
Um, and I got where I wanted to be. And I'm content, I'm happy, I'm okay. Am I finished? No. And yet there was also a moment where I went, okay, this has to be content because you got to focus on this other thing.
Right.
Because I did realize, oh, you cannot wake up every morning with papers and books in the bed. It's
Mm-hmm.
unhealthy. So
Mm-hmm.
boundaries.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm getting to. Now, even now in this position, I I still teach this year. I'm still teaching my regular schedule this year. So
Okay.
Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays I teach. Tuesdays and Thursdays are my administration days.
Okay.
Tuesdays and Thursdays are days, and I tell faculty that, well, can we meet tomorrow? I don't meet on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. That's for the students. Tuesdays and Thursdays, even when I don't teach, and as many faculty members, when they don't teach or have meetings, they will often do work from home. Like many of us, I actually go into campus on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I open
Okay.
my door and I say, I'm here. So if you want to chat and talk about your projects or endeavors and so forth, come in. And then at 3 o'clock, I'm done and I go home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love it. Not only are you a leader in the profession, right, and in the academy, but you're a leader in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because people who are able to effectively lead in their lives, they know when we need to set boundaries, they know when
Yes.
we need to reprioritize and make adjustments. Um, and so you're learning about yourself through this
Mm-hmm.
leadership in
Mm-hmm.
both areas. But, could you just say briefly, something that you've learned about yourself in the new role that you have as the
Mm-hmm.
interim associate dean for research and creative endeavors, something that maybe you had not considered before, something that was brought to your attention?
Yes. I've never been asked that question, or at least recently.
Right.
I'm gonna name this. I learned recently. I'm learning that two things actually. One is something that I've been practicing for a while, but it's even more necessary, right? It's quite necessary now, and that is full transparency. I believe in full transparency in every area of my life. To personal, right? Like my personal life, that hurt my feelings this morning. I did not like that. I know that was not your intent, but that did hurt my feelings. I want you to know. To that, and that's like personal, that's at home, that's small, but
Right.
be transparent, right?
Hmm.
To work where, I have to be, critically honest and transparent with colleagues. There was something that I learned, for instance, about the university and our College of Fine Arts. And I said, I can go into this meeting and I can soften it and sweeten it up and say, well, I had a meeting with upper administration and they'd like for us to sort of go in this area, and I think we should really follow that.
Mhm.
Or, and the second thing is what I did. I went and I said, this is how they think of us, and we have 6 months to turn that around. We're not viewed in this positive light by this particular group of folk. And I want and 6 months is my time. I want to give us 6 months to turn that around. What are we going to do? And so this meeting today is about the thing we need to do, right? And so full
Yes.
transparency, as opposed to hiding, or it's not hiding, but attempting to soften or, keep information removed from the very people who need to know it, your faculty members.
Right.
So that's the one thing, which is full transparency. The second thing is this is more practical. I'm realizing that if okay, say this for the first time out loud in a public space, I got to get out the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
It's time for me to make that transition out the classroom.
Yes.
Not completely. So for instance, there's some courses that I love teaching. Black theater
Yes.
history. I love teaching Black theater history. Because when I teach it, I'm learning like something new. It's the most exciting thing in the world as a cultural historian. But if not if, as I continue in this pathway in terms of administration and leadership, I gotta remove myself from the classroom. You cannot do both. It is hard work to do both. And it's not even that it's hard work. We can do hard work. We know hard work.
Right.
It is actually you are bogged down with both things that need your full attention. And so I'm learning like, oh, okay, which is why I got the Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday schedule this semester.
Okay.
But I'm realizing I think I want to exit the classroom
Mhm.
eventually, sort of phase myself out. I think I'm there. Yeah.
I thought about you because I mean, and you mentioned it, this is the third institution that you've been at.
Hmm.
And so even moving from Columbia College, Chicago, University of
Hmm.
Georgia, Howard University. I mean, they're all different
Yes.
institutions that require different strategies
Yes.
to elevate from one to the other. And I feel like faculty don't always have the conversation or know like what is required to
Hmm.
shift from
Hmm.
this institution to that institution
Yes.
because we're not always thinking we're going to make those shifts,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Yes.
But are there things that you can extrapolate from having shifted in the way that you have, um, that you might offer because that's a transition in
Yes.
leadership in a different
Yes.
place,
Yep. Yep.
right? So are there things that you can extrapolate from having made those kinds of shifts that you think could benefit faculty who want to shift and may not necessarily know where they want to
Right.
go?
Um, hmm. The thing that I would say is, be clear and be honest. Be clear, be honest, and be direct. Um, but also, I don't care what institution you're at. So, Columbia College Chicago was an arts-centered institution. We called it the People's Institute. Um, well known. And then you have University of Georgia, which is a Research One institution. You have Howard University, which is an HBCU, um, um, a premier HBCU, that is, met the metrics to be, uh, for the R1 status. In the DMV, also, I want to name that in a major city, like, right in DC, in the heart, but they're all academic institutions and they're all part of, academia, the large umbrella of academia. And so what I've learned is that you don't go to one and the other and not have similar kinds of situations and problems and
Mhm.
concerns and issues. And I'm not talking about personal problem. I'm talking about structural or
That's right.
infrastructure. I'm talking about like things that
Yes.
academia, right, has and will continue to deal with. Um, you know, if you think about it like the foundation of a home, some folks will get their bricks pointed every 5 years, and some folks do it every 20.
Hmm.
And there is, consequences for that 20 years waiting to get those bricks pointed.
That's right. I
And
actually
yep,
said to my new faculty colleague,
yep,
mentees, you need a 5-year plan, and you
yes,
should start drafting that plan like now.
yes,
And have a
yes,
conversation with your chair, your program director, if you're jointly appointed,
yes,
and your vice dean or the dean that your chair and program director would report to,
yes,
however they are named, about what kind of infrastructure is necessary for you to do the work that you were
yes,
hired to do, right?
yes.
So usually it doesn't exist
Usually doesn't exist.
because they're leaning on your expertise
Yep,
to name the things and your ability to be entrepreneurial in your thinking to identify the resources in the face of the resources that may not exist right
yes,
now.
yes,
Right. And that's
yes,
why you need to come up with a 5-year plan.
yes,
And it can
yes,
be 3 years or
yep,
4, depending on that tenure trajectory, right? Because when I
yes,
ended up at William and Mary, I came in on a shorter clock.
yep,
So, this 3, 4, 5-year plan is going to shift when you get to the next level. Oh, you
yes,
need a plan. The exact same thing. Have the conversation with the requisite
yep,
people to
yep,
identify the infrastructure that's necessary for you to get to the next level.
yep. Yep. I'll give you an example. I did that today. I had a meeting today on campus at 1 o'clock. What I did was today was our first meeting. I pulled together what I'm calling the Research and Creative Endeavors team. It's
Yes.
a yearly team that can change every year. And today was our first meeting. And I said, all right, first meeting. What are we doing? What do we want to see happen? Where do we need to grow in terms of research and creative endeavors? And by the end of that meeting, we had laid out about 6 things that we liked to be done. And we tiered them: things that can be done next semester, things that can be done in a year, things that will take about 3 years. And here's the 5th year project, right? So we tiered them. We legit laid out a 5-year plan today. Um, and so to your point, it is really about, so here's the thing. It is about the vision. For me, someone
Yes.
in the leadership role, you gotta have a vision. It's like being a director. You are a director, so you know what I'm talking about. You
Mhm.
read that play or you begin to devise something or whatever the creative process is, you're like, I see this. I see this, and I know that it can happen.
Mhm.
And so the second question is, do we have the resources to make it happen?
Right.
Oh, we don't have those things. Okay, let me pivot. No, it's not about getting rid of the idea, but let me pivot in terms of the vision of how to make it then happen, right?
Entrepreneurialism.
You have to be exactly, exactly. And so for me, it was always about saying, this, I know we can do this, and this is what it can look like. And so I want us to focus on that. And to your point about, the various institutions I've been at and what do you do when it's time to pivot and move on or shift and so forth. It is about saying, this is my job. Many of us have that superhero syndrome.
Mhm.
We want to save everything and everybody. And I still have a little bit of that in me, which is why sometimes it is 10:30 at night and I'm like, hey, I'm just coming home. I'm gonna grab something on the way. You know,
Yeah.
it's a late night and I gotta get up at 6 again because I gotta be on campus by 7:30 for the first meeting at 8 a.m.
All right.
What I'm learning is, oh, some of that ain't got nothing to do with me. And it's not that I don't
Yes.
want to participate. It's not that I can't offer. It's not that I
Mhm.
can't be a resource, but I cannot take on everything because it's not my job. And I'm gonna say this I'm not a capitalist, obviously. I'm not, I don't got the money to be a capitalist, but I also don't believe in it. But that ain't what I'm getting paid for. Do what you're getting paid to do. Because, and this is, and you know this, when it came back to like when folks are, and I say this to colleagues who are going up for tenure or on tenure track,
Mhm.
you can do all that stuff you want, but when it comes to the evaluation, they're going to ask, because I came into Howard tenured. Um, what folks don't know is that I was going up at Columbia before I left, and I decided to leave. And so then I was going up early at University of Georgia, and then then Howard pulled me in.
Okay.
And so I said, well, I was going to go up for tenure at both these institutions. Can I go up? I had to submit my materials. So I knew in March of 2023 that I had gotten the position at Howard. I didn't make it public until the summer because I had to submit my dossier and all my materials and everything.
That's right.
And
And sometimes you got to move in silence.
so, I believe in that deeply. You got to move in silence. And so then I made it public. But I'm saying that to say it's very similar to that kind of process, right? That you have to do the job that they're expecting you to do.
That's right.
That doesn't mean you don't go and do other things in other arenas. And I'm not talking about mentorship in students. That's not what I'm talking about, because I do
Right.
believe we're supposed to do that. But I'm talking about, various kinds of committees that has nothing to even do with your area or volunteering to lead something when you have to lead your own area. And so I'm learning that. I'm learning to say, okay, this is not my purview. That's a mess too. I know I can fix that up. But then, don't look at it because it's a mess. It's like a pile of clothes. Just don't look at it and focus on what you need to focus on. Focus on the windows, because that is what Thursday's goal is, not the laundry. It's that kind of thing. And it's hard, but you do have to do it. And because what they're looking at is what you're doing in your particular role, that is what you will be assessed on. And that's how I'm gonna be very clear. My position as associate dean, the title is interim for the year, but it is a 3-year position. I signed a 3-year contract. My role, when those 3 years are up, and I want to either stay in it or go up for something else or begin to move, I have
Yeah.
to be able to say, here's how you can assess me. Here's the things I've done. And
Yes.
if that's not there, if it's empty, just like that tenure, if that tenure profile and that dossier, if it's empty, you have not fulfilled your obligations because you still
Hey,
focused on everything else. So yeah.
look, Dr. Baron Kelly said it
Yes.
plainly.
Yes.
Um, do your job,
Do your job.
because when
Yep.
you do your job,
Mhm.
they cannot box with you,
They cannot
right?
box with you.
Because you've
Yes.
done the job.
My homegirl, one of my closest friends who Tamia Webster,
Mm-hmm.
who we started at Maryland together. She was in the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, we're both at Howard now too. So when I got the job, people said, "Y'all are back together. Oh, this ain't gonna be good for nobody involved." And I said, "Because they know us, we tear the place up." So she always says, and I have lived by this: put the work on the table. You put your work on the table, no one can say anything to you. And what I mean by that is, I interview for things. I'm often poached. I get messages and emails about, we've been looking at you, we've been observing you, we're interested in you. Even to like my dramaturgy gigs, my publications and things that I've been privy to be invited to participate in rather than applying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because people observe what you do and
All
they
right.
see when you put the work on the table. They want to work with you. They want to be in relationship with you. Put your work on the table. And it is things that I tell students, especially when I was advising graduate students at University of Georgia, and even now, colleagues and students, put your work on the table. Um, and it's a cultural moment. I'm gonna say this in a cultural way. You're talking too much and you ain't doing no work. And people look at me and I go, and I leave, I don't follow up.
Right.
And I just shake my hand, I look at them. You're talking too much and you ain't doing no work. And I leave it at that. And you do whatever you want with that because they want to see the work when it comes,
That's right.
especially when your stuff goes up to a dean or a provost who don't know you.
That's right.
I don't know that you're a nice person. That's wonderful that you're nice, but I need to see some work. So yeah.
Put your work on the table, folks. I
Yep.
think uh that's real. And we could end there. But I do want to ask this one last question, because
Yep.
this conversation has been rich. Um, in all the various leadership roles that you have held, where have you found renewal?
Mhm.
Where have you found renewal?
I think each of them have offered that. If I may, if I can say, each of them have offered that in various ways, right? So I remember when in 2018 I was living in Chicago and I got a phone call from Dr. Sandra Shannon, and she says, I've been thinking about you for this vice president and conference planner role. And I said, wow. And I knew Dr. Shannon, but to get that kind of phone call from her around this organization, right? And it renewed my energy, right, around August Wilson, um, around Black theater, around the necessity of smaller yet resourceful and important organizations.
Mhm.
Um, you know, when I was at Columbia and I was a coordinator, and then I had the opportunity to develop the theater studies concentration from scratch. So, and when I say the theater studies concentration, it was like developing a new major, but it was a concentration instead of a full-blown major. But you had to write a very similar kind of proposal, had to go up and so forth. So that then after that was, successfully granted, I was tasked to join the cultural studies committee by the provost. I was tapped by the provost. She called me into her office and said, I want you to join the cultural studies committee. They're going to revise and bring back the cultural studies program, and I want you to be part of it. So so all of them, I'll say that at Howard, when I was a when I was appointed, or as I say, earned this position.
Right. Say that.
Yeah, well, I told listen, because they'll use the term, oh, he was appointed, but I was interviewed several times. There were meetings. My material had to go all the way up and be approved by the provost. Number two, like, it wasn't just simply the dean says, I want you. I had to be approved by the dean. And I put my work on the table to get there. Um, I was like, oh, I can do this, and I can support the College of Fine Arts, the Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts, to get where it's attempting to go. I can
Yeah.
support getting us there. Give me the opportunity to get us there. It's not easy work. And oftentimes leadership roles are roles that you will create enemies. Unfortunately, you will have, and I use the word enemy because it's a universal term, but you will have folks who just will not be in relationship with you for
Yeah.
whatever reason. And I'm clear about that. And I'm actually okay with that. Right. And how can I support you in your work?
That's
How
right.
do I show up
Still.
for you? Like, how do I show up for you? I have
Yes.
colleagues that we're not in great relationships, and yet still, what do you need for your work to get done in your project? Because I want to make sure that you are productive in the ways in which you hope to be and that we need you to be, because you
Well,
are
because see,
part
it's
of
not
this culture.
personal.
Now, I tell
You
you all the
are a
time,
leader.
I say this all the time. Listen, we can go toe to toe in a meeting. Like, I'll go toe to toe with you in a meeting. And when I say that, I mean, I disagree with you. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
disagree. And let me pull this out. Let me show you. Because according to our bylaws and this and our fund, whatever the case may be,
Mm-hmm.
and when it's over, round of drinks on me. I got the first round.
That's right.
Learn to separate. You got to separate. So yeah. So all of those opportunities have been, gratifying, and I hope that this new position is just as gratifying. And the thing, I want to end it with this, and that is this. I want to make sure I say this. I'm a dramaturg professionally, so I work in theaters around the country, you know, but I'm in a field theater where folks love to be out in the front.
Mhm.
That is not who I am. People think it is. It's not. I actually don't. I'm not a birthday person. I'm not I let people say happy birthday, but I don't do nothing. I'm not I don't need to be celebrated in that kind of way. And it's funny because my husband always says, let me do this. And I go, I know, I just, that's not who I am. As I get older, I'm decreasing in those areas a lot. I'm saying it to say, even if you never know that I did it, I want to be able to say, I did that. I made Howard look this way. I made College of Fine Arts look good in this moment. I had August Wilson Society get this big grant. Even if my name is never mentioned, I'm okay with that because I know that I was there to do the work. And so for me, it is about the work without the spotlight. And that's why I like administrative. I want to go into administration. That's why that is the career trajectory for me. Yeah.
Mhm. put the work on the table, folks. Dr. Long, of course, I mean, I knew the discussion was going to be
Yeah.
rich just simply because of who you are and all the work that you have laid on the table. I knew that
Thank
there were
you.
going to be jewels that all of us could continue to learn from here in this series, Transitions and Leadership. It is always good to be in community with you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for your time this evening. And I wish you all the best in your new position and in
Thank
all the
you.
things to come.
Thank you so much. Thank you.